to that, since you mentioned I represent an agency side, I represent an agency that's 2 months old in this country. So maybe you've never heard of it, so let me introduce it. It's called Point 9 Lintas. And so if the Lintas name rings a bell with you and the Mullen-Lowe Lintas group rings a bell with you, then you'd be surprised to hear that after the many, many years that a Lowe Lintas has been in India and the several years that a Mullen Lintas has been in India, there is now a third agency in the group called Point 9 Lintas. And if you're wondering why we're called Point 9, it's because we didn't want to call ourselves a full, complete number. There's a reason why. And before I digress really quick, communication changes every 6 months. Your strategies must change every 6 months. So we will be in an always beta state. So the reason I'm here today is, well, partly because my MD couldn't make it, but he wanted me to be the mouthpiece to share 3 provocative questions. So I'm going to start with 3 provocative questions,
Sure.
Which hopefully none of you will put me on the stake for. But these are questions not coming from my agency, but coming from the mouths of our clients who we spoke to. So the first thing our client said is, why don't publishers understand us better as brands? Number 1. And number 2, why are they complicating things? So we dug deeper and asked them, why do you say that? And here were the 3 provocative questions that came out from our clients. Number 1, why should I put my brand on your website? Question 2, is the target audience coming to your website right for me? And question number 3, which I think is the most provocative, is don't confuse me with your metrics. I'm very clear what mine are. So if you're not able to answer those 3 questions for advertisers as a publisher, you're in trouble.
Okay, okay, great. But Tara, what about you? Why don't you respond to the very first question I started this discussion with, that does brand building even matter for website brands? And if it does, are they doing enough?
So I would say yes, that it absolutely does matter. And from Akamai's perspective, we want to make sure that the publishers that we work with are delivering a very excellent performance, an excellent user experience. And we've conducted tests recently associated directly with the brand. And one in particular is with a third party called Sensum. And so we had 1,200 individuals participate in this study. And we showed them 2 different videos, one that performed well and one that performed poorly with buffering. And very quickly after they saw the poor performing video, we asked them to associate words with the video that they just saw. And they used words like disgust. And they associated the brand directly with also saying that these videos were boring and all these very negative words. So we think that the performance of what you're offering to your consumers, the website itself and the videos and the images and whatnot, do tie directly to the brand.
Okay, okay. Prateek, I'll bring you in here at this point, What I'd like to ask you is that when there's a mothership like Times Internet, when there's a constellation of brands under it, website brands under it, what tends to happen is the mother brand is more recognized than perhaps the individual brands under it. So is that a problem? And should these individual brands work harder towards building their own brands and sort of divorce themselves with the mother brand at a halo level?
Yeah, good question. But fortunately or unfortunately, we haven't had that problem because Times Internet, though, is the holding company and the holding body.
Yes.
The individual brands do have a distinct identity for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And very consciously over the years, the management has felt that each of the individual brands, whether it's Times of India or Ghana or CricBuzz, needs to have a distinct identity and a personality for itself. And it is only very recently that we've started propagating the Times Internet is the body, which is sort of is the holding company that operates all these. But to answer your question, yes, it is very important that each brand, publisher brand, needs to create and carve a distinct identity and a personality for itself, however large or small it may be.
Okay. Okay. Abhilasha, you have to jump in right here because it's quite similar even for you. Though the word group was missing in your designation, she does handle more than just one .com, not just the Hindu, it's the entire group. So what do you have to say about, the mothership being more powerful as a brand than individual brands under it?
Yeah. I'm audible?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Just before I answer that, I'll get back to the question that you asked about, is brand building
Yes.
important for publishers' brand? And the leading question went on to say that when advertisers are looking for CTR and other stuff, how important is it?
Traffic and-
We at the Hindu see brand building on both angles of not just for the sake of getting advertisers onto the site, but I think brand building begins with your user generation, right? So the more we build our brand, the profile of our user audience gets better, and therefore advertising is just, we feel, is the end result of that. And
Okay.
there are brands within the Hindu, because you've asked about the Hindu group.
Group.
The Hindu is the most famous or the well-known one, the Hindu.com, but we have other sub-brands like the Young World, which is for children. There is the Hindu in School, and so and so. Or these are not actually dependent on advertising itself. We build them as separate products where we actually get users to pay for the content. Right? So I think right from morning we've been talking about how most of our revenue is through advertising, but we, while we are slow and we are getting into the digital space, we've kind of moved towards getting users to pay for the content rather than only depend on the advertising.
Okay, I'll stay with you, Abhilasha, for a moment more. Another question for you, for you and Prateek, the legacy publishers at a brand level, that do your efforts towards building your print brand successfully rub off on your online brand, or do you have to make focused efforts towards the latter?
Okay, I'll go first. I would say yes and no. For instance, I mean, if you see, the legacy brands have an advantage of being well recognized,
Right.
for being the credible source even online. If you ask anyone if they've read a news online and ask them, where did you read it? Because this morning we just said that most of our news feed comes from Google or Facebook. And many times I've heard people in my own circle say, I read this on Facebook or I read this on Google. I mean, nobody remembers which is the .com they read this on. In that scenario, I feel that legacy brands like us have a certain advantage because they do sometimes go direct source and read publications of us. That said, that does not make it very easy for us as well because we're competing against so many people. So there is a certain amount of effort that needs to go to build the online brand.
Absolutely, and a lot of youngsters out there may meet your brand for the first time online, and they may not meet it in
They may
print
not
at all.
know the,
So,
yes.
yeah, focused efforts at catering to them as well. So, Prateek, what's your thought on this?
Yeah, it's both an advantage and a disadvantage. Let me just tell you how we've sort of factored that into our plans. See, the core of the Times of India brand, being the largest print media publication in the country, was a certain sense of national social responsibility. We are there to provide information. When you translate that into the digital age, by virtue of the platform itself, it moves away from being a one-way dissemination platform to a two-way engagement platform. And keeping the core DNA of providing not just news and being nationally socially responsible, we need to do our bit at timesofindia.com to give Indians an opportunity. And therefore, the creation of IPs under the brand of TOI, such as Right India, which gives an opportunity to young Indians to sort of fulfill their aspirations of becoming a writer or writing with eminent authors. Therefore, you create an IP and a property called the Times of India Sports Awards, which is where you celebrate Indian achievement by athletes and you get Indian consumers to vote for their popular sports athletes. You create properties like Photo India or Roll India, which are properties in the video or in the photography space. So taking the national social responsibility angle of the brand and converting it into a two-way platform, which is what the digital media allows. Similarly, for smaller brands, which are niche brands like mensxp.com, where there is an opportunity to cater to a very niche audience. It is the young male, 18 to 24. It's part of the Times Internet portfolio. Very clearly, when we look at our content, which is the core product, we always talk to the audience like an equal. So, for example, there are very clear editorial boundaries and guidelines. It's not necessarily always chasing for the UVs and PVs. So we would not talk about, unfortunately, a train accident in Jharkhand on mensxp.com. We'll always talk about things that are of inspiration and motivation to the young male audience. So that's those sort of the brand guidelines that we define and work closely with the editorial team
Okay.
towards.
Do they, before I go on to my next question, which is for Deepak and for Tara, I'd like to ask Prateek one follow-up question. Do they all have, all these websites, do they have dedicated brand heads as well? Is that a designation, like, brand heads that deal with...
In the case of Times Internet, yes.
Yes, okay. All right.
Actually, before you jump into the question, can
Sure.
I just add something? So
Yeah.
to both my panelists, what you were saying was very interesting to me, but I'm going to regurgitate it back differently. If you are finessing your target audiences, so for example, you've got your mother brand and sub-brands, when you start really pinpointing your target audiences in the digital space, you become very, very interesting for advertisers. Rather than what metrics and all of that, here's a very focused target audience that I have, and that will pull in a certain set of advertisers on their own because of the focus of your target audience.
Right. This
I
came
think
up
that's
earlier
a-
on our panel on
interesting point.
specialized websites, right? So would you agree that brand building efforts become all the more crucial and easy somehow for specialized websites?
I would say absolutely. I mean, the more targeted that you can be, the more attractive you're going to be to your advertisers. And then you just need to be able to really qualify that. You need to have those metrics in place so that you can deliver that information to the advertisers to keep them coming back for more and to help keep you competitive against the big guys that we've mentioned far too often today.
Right, yeah. So it's both. There's the hard metrics and the intangibles of brand building. Right. Deepak, my question for you really is that in the life cycle of a website, is there any specific stage when brand building becomes more crucial than perhaps other stages? Now, while it's tempting to say it's important right from inception throughout, what's that one crucial stage or two perhaps where brand building becomes more important? What junctures would you highlight?
Actually, I'd answer that by saying the question is wrong. Not that you're asking the wrong question, but I think there is no stage. So I'll give you 3 examples. Of course, it's important to build your brand, but it's important to maintain it. And then it's important not to let it lag and die. So the minute you start deciding that I'm going to focus on the building of the brand or establishing it, or I'm going to put money behind it for a year or 2 and then let it take off organically, or I'm only going to put it money when I start losing eyeballs, that's a problem. You need to know why you're there for the long run. And literally at every stage, you need to have a plan. Like in social media, advertisers make sure that they have content going out regularly. You need to have a focus all the time. And I think the most successful brands do that.
Right. Actually, I'd like everyone to respond to this particular question. Would you like to highlight any specific stage for a brand, generally speaking, in the broadest sense? When does brand building become most crucial?
Yeah, I agree with him that there's no specific stage, but online medium just puts you under one pressure that you have to constantly engage. And the word engagement has been used quite often. And the more engaged you are with your users, right, or your consumer, then your brand is automatically, I mean, the advantage and the disadvantage of the online medium is every brand, forget the publishing brand, every other brand also acts like a publisher brand. I mean, today a Coke can create its own content and create its own channel, and that's also publishing, right? So it's about how you engage with them, create a community, and as he rightly said, how well I know my users, how well I know him, I may know him by name, age, etc. That's what helps me build the brand, and therefore I build a certain style in which I communicate with them, and then it becomes two-way. So I don't think publisher brands, at least the large legacy ones, communicate. I don't know, maybe I'm, at least with the Hindu, we don't communicate back to our readers online, right? So we do put up an article, we get hundreds of comments. I mean, I don't think we respond. We do not go ahead responding well as the other brands do. So I think we need to start moving to that more, learn from your FMCG and other brands and start having communication so we can create a community of readers as well online.
Okay. Oh, that's great. Prateek, what about you? Any life stage tip that comes to mind? And also, does that differ depending on the genre, of course, of the website?
Yeah,
and
it
what
differs,
might the
it
difference
differs
be?
on the genre, and it also differs, generally speaking, maybe 3 to 6 or 9 months after the product, if it's
That's
a new
specific.
product, it sort of stabilizes. That's when you need to start sort of building the brand. It is very important. It sounds like a marketing investment is an expensive investment in the early stage, but it's required because in the long term, if you can get your direct traffic or organic app downloads, it is far more cost effective in the long run. It increases the lifetime value of the customer. The customer is engaged with your particular brand. He likes your content. You won't need to spend later on. So it is far more effective if you spend that money and the dollars in the early stage as well.
Okay, Tara, what about you? He was very specific, with 6 to 9 months, right? Yeah. Do you agree? Maybe a different life stage comes to mind?
Well, I do agree with that timeline. I think it is very important, but I think every marketer's nightmare is that there's an end date to the commitment to your brand, right? You have to be in it for the long haul. Even if it's as simple as a tagline that you decide on, you can't change it 18 months later. Just the sort of basics of marketing. But then I also think, and naturally I would say this, that you need to have the technology in place to back up that brand. And as publishers are trying to get ahead of breaking news and bringing in larger audiences, you need to have the infrastructure in place to support, flash crowds or the breaking news stories, and you need to be able to scale there, because if your site crashes, that has such a detrimental effect to your brand, so you need to be in it for the long haul.
Right, right. Now, we've addressed the first part of this session topic about brand building, whether it applies to websites. Let's address the second part. Are .com brands doing enough today? We can start with a yes, no, and then move on to, when we say efforts, let's make this word a little less ambiguous. What do we do? What do .com brands do? Get an agency, advertise on which platform? What's the best thing? So we can start with you, Deepak, maybe. Are they doing enough? Yes, no? And what are these efforts?
I think, again, part of the problem is not that they're doing enough, they're doing too much.
You
And
think so?
They're doing too much, and they're doing too many confusing things. So I think one of the risks that brands run is when you say too many things to too many people too regularly, and none of them have one consistent vein of thought, that is exactly why you're leaving your core TG confused. You're leaving your advertisers confused. Some of your fans or your followers don't really know what they should be coming to you for. So again, I'll come back to the original point I wanted to make. It's about fine-tuning your audience and getting more and more fine-tuned. And I don't mean the specialized websites, because as I think all my panelists have pointed out, those specialized websites have that advantage.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the big brands that don't think they should have a core TG, actually establishing that. I think that immediately what that does, it solves the question from the advertiser perspective, why should I come? It gives them a clear answer as to why they should.
Okay, that's great. Prateek, what about you? A yes, no, and then what are these efforts that they can take?
Maybe some brands are doing a lot,
Yeah, he said too much.
and some aren't doing as much. So that's a yes, no, maybe. But in terms of effectively deploying, brand building is not just about, for a publisher, it's not just about advertising. The content itself is the product. If you can sharply define, as I said, the content and the communication in terms of targeting to what is your audience, you would be able to define an identity for yourself. Let's say one of our brands, like say ClickBuzz, right? There was an opportunity in the market. There was a very large commentator, an eminent personality, who was let go by a competitor television brand. We saw an opportunity and we signed him up. And that video product has gone on to do 100 million views cumulatively, right, over a 1-year time frame. That's a phenomenal brand building for ClickBuzz that we've done with Harsha, right? So there is an opportunity to create your brand, not just through advertising, but through the product and content itself.
Okay, right. Sarah, what about you? Do you think website brands are doing enough for brand building? Start with a yes, no, and what can they do? What are these efforts? What I'm actually going to get at after Abhilasha has also spoken about this is the agency side. When they do get an agency, what should the brief be like? What should they demand from their agency partners?
So I guess if I had to say yes or no, I'd say no, but I really agree with you that the content is king, right? And that if you provide solid, consistent content that the consumers are coming back for more and they know what they're getting when they come to your website, I think that is a really strong and organic way to build your brand, to get people coming back for more. I think that's the most important aspect.
Okay. Abhilasha, what about you? What's your take?
Yeah, I'll just add on to what they said. Yes, the content is the king, and that's where the brand building is. What we do, at least with the Hindu and our other brands on digital as well, is to identify the purpose of existence, what is it that we are here to do for the user or the audience, and try and create initiatives that link to that. It need not necessarily, like he said, needs to be an advertisement that you run on other mediums. I mean, that's not, I don't think, at least in my opinion, I don't think publisher brands need to do that. For example, we have something called the business line on campus, for which
Okay.
we've created a national level property, which is a boardroom challenge for students. Now, we engage with the community. There's enough marketing that happens around that, and that kind of builds the purpose of the existence, right? So what is the purpose of your brand? It is there to enable B-schoolers to get a job. So if you are going to work towards that, and that itself gives you enough and more brand building, and therefore, I think that's the focus we go for. The Hindu, it would be a cause that concerns the nation, concerns our people. So that would be the brand building effort.
Oh, okay, okay. Deepak, I want you to respond to that. You know, she said that not necessarily that medium versus this. So how would you respond to that?
Fair
Very,
enough, but
very
I just want to
specific.
jump back to the earlier question you had asked, or so maybe it's the next question you're coming to, but I just wanted to cover this point. One simple metric would make life so much easier, right? One simple metric. So I'd like to give an example because I'm coming from the advertising point of view, but not traditional advertising. So let me explain why I'm going to say what I'm going to say. Point Nine Lintas is a digital marketing agency called Interactive, and a PR agency called Golden Opinion, and an activation agency called Engage. All three smashed together to form a new format of an advertising agency. Why? Because if you can engage with consumers via the digital medium, you can influence them with stories via PR, and you can activate them either online or in the real world. Maybe you never need advertising. Maybe you never need a TVC, a press ad, an outdoor, or a radio spot. Because the simple measure that we're trying to offer our clients is purchase intent. It's as simple as that. What is the purchase intent? And is that growing?
And
So if publishers
Yeah.
narrow down and invent their own single metric, whatever that is, and I can't offer that solution today, something original, something new, I think they start solving a lot of problems for themselves and a lot of the questions you've asked today.
okay, okay. And which medium works best for this?
I don't think there's any one medium that works best, but it definitely, from our agency's perspective, cannot begin with, here is your 60-second, 1 crore TV commercial. It cannot begin from there. It must begin from what is the task at hand for X brand, and then really it's omni-channel. You may decide it's only digital and activation, or maybe it's only PR.
Okay, great, great. I'm out of questions, but I've been told we should take audience questions now. So let's go for it. Any questions for the panelists? Please keep your questions short and don't forget to introduce yourself. Yeah, sure.
This was in the original, subject that are you so driven by matrix, right? So would you say that question has been fully answered? I mean, is our publisher so driven by matrix, CTRs, all the stuff that's measurable? Because it's measurable, therefore, do you care less about brand building? I mean, do you think the question's been answered, or?
Shrikant, we do have one of those
Is the
metrics.
measurability become a liability?
I don't think so, Shrikant, because one of the metrics itself is direct traffic or organic downloads. So therefore, as the marketing team, you have to ensure that you are consistently and continuously building the brand. So it is one of the 7 or 8 metrics. It is, yes, some organizations would give a greater weightage on UVs and PVs as compared to the percentage of traffic in absolute terms that's coming from organic, but certain organizations and brands do give it a higher priority, right?
Okay. Abhilash, you want to add to that?
See,
Please.
being advertisers ourselves, I mean, we also advertise for our brands, right? We don't only go by metrics. When I choose to advertise, I don't go by the metrics of how many viewers walk in or what's the CTR or so and so. So I think if we know that, we are also clear that an advertiser wouldn't come to us just because we can show this many page visits or the time spent. It's also the quality of the audience and the intent in which the audience is spending time there. I mean, it's about the relevance of the site and the quality of the audience. I think we understand that, and we're trying to sell that to the audience as well.
Great. Are there any more questions?
Hey,
In the previous session which you did, Ashwini, there
Yeah.
was this whole thing about ultimately
Specialized.
all advertisers are looking for this big number, so if you read any survey, any research done on what's working online, it's the big items which work, the
Right.
big film, the big show, the big brand. Where is this, I mean, we are really, fine tuning, and there's so much discussion around fine tuned data, etc. But really, when it comes to 7 or 10% of budget that digital gets, or whatever percentage of budget it gets, finally, it again comes down to the same thing, number one, number two, and within that, languages go for a toss, specialty websites, etc. So how does one reconcile what one is hearing here with what is happening when one talks to buyers outside?
I guess media buyers should also answer this because,
Yeah,
I mean,
I
even
mean-
when I ask for a plan, even if I specifically say I want to advertise in this particular site, media buyers have come back and said, no, I don't think you would get the right CTR, might as well go with something which is larger. So I would would you be able to help us?
Sorry, me? Okay, I'm going to answer that from the creative perspective because I'm not a media planner.
We
but
don't have a media buyer here.
so I'll answer that a little bit differently maybe because I really don't think I can answer the question, so I'll use my time a little bit wisely. You mentioned 7%. So I'll give you an example of a client recently, and we're just a 2-month-old agency, called India Gate. Now, India Gate's basmati rice, but they're launching a new product called quinoa. They've put 100% of their budget, 100% of the launch budget on digital. Correct. But you're absolutely right. But here's the thing. Correct. But it's about thinking differently and looking at it differently. So a quinoa would be a health product. Everyone would assume you would eat it for health. No, they've launched it as eat your brownies, but add quinoa on them. Indulgence will never go away. So what am I saying? It's about just looking at every opportunity in a drastically different way in order to achieve different types of results. So I don't know if I'm answering your question directly or not, but what I find interesting is and that's an advertiser brand as well. So if our advertiser brands are re-looking at how they want to market themselves, maybe it's about publishers re-looking at how they project themselves.
Yeah,
Prateek.
I've been a marketer on the other side before, a publisher marketer here. As a client and as an advertiser, you always know who your core constituent consumer is. It doesn't matter whether you're selling an automobile or you're selling a cola or you're selling a soap. You know who your primary audience is. If a publisher brand is able to sharply define who its core consumer is, there will be believability and viability from the media planner and from the client side as to this is the right fitment for my audience, and there is an audience connect. And that is where a lot of the publishers fail. They are not able to sharply define who their consumer is, irrespective of if it may be a niche brand or a mass brand. If you're able to sharply define your primary and secondary audience, you will be able to speak the same language with a client marketer.
Okay.
I couldn't agree more. I think if this is probably him hitting the nail on the head. If that's the one thing publishers need to take out of this session, that will be it.
Right. Do we have time for more questions, or should we request them to take it
yeah.
offline? We can wrap up. Okay, great. Thank you.